one, I'm going to delve into music theory, which I've not done for a while, and I'm going to make the bold suggestion to stop thinking in keys. I will explain more in a moment. But firstly, if you'd like to support the channel, you can check out some of my tracks and work out whether I do actually know anything about what I'm talking about, and I'll leave links in the description. So back to the topic in hand. So why would I be foolish enough to do a video suggesting that you stop thinking in keys? Well, it depends on many things. If you're a music analyst, then to stop thinking in keys is probably not going to work for you. But if you write music and you want to write something which is perhaps slightly different, then thinking in keys will just result in you writing music in keys. You might think, well, what's wrong with that? You've got to bear in mind that keys have been in use for a good part of 300 years, and they're very well trodden. While you could argue that some of the best music that's ever been written has been written in keys, there are many alternatives. And I wanted to use this video to encourage people to think outside the box so that there's a greater chance that they can hit on something a bit more original. I'm being quite cagey about that term originality because, as it's often said, there is nothing that is original. Now, I don't know whether that's strictly true or not, but I think that there are very well-trodden paths and there are less well-trodden paths. And therefore, if you are going to go on the less well-trodden path, you've got a better chance of finding something that, okay, it may well have been visited by someone before, but you might be able to find a different angle on it. So the other thing I wanted to cover is that if you're new to writing music, you may well have started off, say, trying things out on a keyboard, finding a combination of chords that you liked, but not really understanding what it was that you were doing within the context of music theory. At some point you think, well, I need to know more about this if I'm going to progress, which is perfectly reasonable, and so you start studying music theory. And one of the first things that you're going to find is the key system. Now that again is fine. The danger is that when you first come across music theory, you are encouraged by people that clearly know more than yourself to think from the point of view of keys. The problem with this is that you're automatically putting your creativity in a box. So I think that brings me on to my first alternative approach. One of the things that's always mystified me slightly about music theory is the overemphasis of keys. Now, that wouldn't be such a big deal if they were truly isolated examples of the diatonic scale, but they are not. There are actually 7 modes, and the keys, in their simplest forms, are just 2 examples of that. So you actually have 7 different ways in which you can express yourself musically with the scale. Now, I'll give some examples of that in a minute, but essentially, if you think of it from the point of view that there are 7 notes that you use within, shall we say, a C major scale, C would be the root, but there are another 6 notes. So if each one of those is given the role of root, it changes the emphasis of the scale to the point that you get something which sounds really quite different, even though you're using the same notes. These are the modes. One of those modes is the natural minor scale, so both the major and minor scale are covered within this grouping, but also you have another 5 modes, having subtly different characters, and some of them having quite extreme characters, but they're all very emotional, they're all very human, and they relate very well to the major and minor scale, but just with slightly different emphasis. Cue the quick examples. I may well want to come back to modes at some point in the future because it's a very interesting subject. next suggestion is to explore scales which are more exotic than the diatonic collection. Now, this is where we really open the floodgates of possibilities. You can have scales which are more simple. For instance, there's a collection of pentatonic scales which only have 5 notes. So you have scales from the modes of limited transposition, with example being the whole tone scale, but there are various diminished scales as well. There are a whole host of distorted diatonic scales. And of course, you can just use all 12 notes. That's also a possibility. Each one of these scales will have its own characteristic, its own mood. Some of them are very dark, some of them are very dissonant, but also some of them are incredibly light, incredibly consonant, particularly the pentatonic scales. They're really worth looking at. I think I described this suggestion as why commit yourself at all? If you're writing music at a keyboard, instead of sitting down and thinking, well, I must be in D, why not think, let's hold fire on that. Let's just see where my fingers take me. Let's see what I come up with. And then if I feel the need to analyze it later, I can then make a decision as to whether I'm in D major or D minor or something else. So to give you an example, I was watching a video of someone analysing a particular piece of music. They'd established that the root note happened to be D, my favourite note, the one I always seem to end up landing on. And they therefore said that it was in the key of D. But the problem is, that was all the information that we had at that point. There was a bass line which used D and didn't use any other notes. It was just some kind of rhythm using D. You could perhaps at a stretch say, well, that's the root of the piece. But without any other notes to provide context, you can't say it's in the key of D. So we're in D. No, we're not necessarily in D. We are using the note D. In the same way, if you're writing music and you happen to start off with D in your bass, you shouldn't automatically think, well, therefore I've committed myself to writing in D major or D minor. You haven't. You're just using a D. Why not see where your fingers are going to take you? And to give you an example of that, if I play D and then I put the B and the F sharp on top, then I've got a B minor chord. It's an illusion. I could have done a minute and a half of doing something rhythmic over D, and then eventually when the rest of the harmony comes in, actually there's something going on in B minor. At which point then you know you're in the key of B minor. No, you're not. All you've done is play a B minor chord. There are another 4 notes in B minor to establish it as B minor, and until you hear all of those notes you cannot be certain that you are really in B minor, and that's the point. So just leave it open. Don't say that you're in one key or another key, because you might decide that what you really want to do now is this. So now you have a B flat major chord, and then you've got 2 chords which have a shared note that come from technically different keys. So then you need to start the argument. Well, which key is it in? Is it going to be in, is it in B flat? Is it in B minor? Well, it's not really in either of them, is it? It's just 2 chords that have a shared note. But you will find discussions about this all over the internet, forums that say, well, actually, you know, it's because it's a major chord, then, you know, it really is the B flat major. Is it really in a key at all? No? Yes, I don't know. You can put an argument that one chord is being borrowed as a substitution for what blah 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 from another key, but it seems to me that all you're doing in that circumstance is just tying yourself in knots, when the explanation for what you actually have in front of you is actually far simpler. You have 2 chords with a shared note. That's it. Now, depending on how you use those chords, you may find one is the one that you more easily can resolve to. But even then, that doesn't establish key. At the best, it establishes root. Hopefully that makes sense. Whatever. Perhaps a shorter way of putting it is to say, see where your fingers take you, see what you come up with that you like the sound of, and don't worry about keys. If you get to a point where you get stuck and you want to use music theory to unstick you, as it were, then yes, you may need to analyse it, and perhaps analysing it from the point of view of keys can help you. But also bear in mind that it can get ridiculously complicated even with a simple 4-note loop of chords when people start talking about borrowing chords from this key and that key. I think sometimes it's just easier to think of it as a collection of chords that work together, and then try some alternatives if you need to expand the piece and you need more harmony. You don't need to make it that complicated. So just to clarify, I don't have anything against keys. I have, and almost certainly will, write plenty of music in keys. But I do have one last tip which should make music written in keys a bit more interesting. And that is, make sure you use different keys each time you write. It's very natural if you play a particular instrument to gravitate towards the keys which are easier to play. And on the keyboard it's particularly bad, because unless you have gone through any sort of rigor of piano training, you may well be a little bit shy of the black notes. And that's a great shame, because it does tend to mean there's a ridiculous amount of white note music, i.e. music which is in C major and A minor. It's something you need to be aware of, because if you want your music to stand out, and perhaps you're submitting a track to someone, if you're writing everything in C major and A minor, and everybody else is writing everything in C major and A minor, then your track just isn't going to stand out. There are 12 major keys and 12 minor keys, so that gives you bare minimum 24 options. So don't be scared of the black notes. They will make your music significantly more interesting. And also, if you purposefully choose a key that you've never used before, your fingers will just work differently on the keyboard, and you could easily find something that you've not used before, and it will help to progress your music creation. Hopefully that's given you some ideas of things that you can try and come out with some more original music. I know that to a large extent this is a video for me as well. I very often just get into a particular mindset and I don't challenge myself to try new things enough. So I am going to go back and I'm going to try out some of this stuff as well, because I have been quite lazy in that regard, and I've probably been just writing loads of stuff in keys as well. But I do like to shake things up, and for me it's definitely time to do some new stuff and some old stuff, but that's a different story. So that's my challenge. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hopefully catch you on the next one, and until then, bye.